Five Leaves Left, and Pink Moon. All three essential albums. You're with Julian on the Brown Note Review for a movie review. James Wan's new film, Malignant. I like the word malignant. I'm not on the... He's an Australian director and he's now getting called the King of Horror. And I don't buy that because I can understand the first Saw film being a decent horror. But honestly, I didn't really care for that franchise. I thought the other films got progressively worse. And a lot of his other stuff, I didn't see Insidious. Apparently that was a fairly average horror that's also spawned sequels. He's produced an awful lot as well. The one film that stood out was Fast and Furious 7, his step up to the big league of $100 million budgets, which was good. He helmed it well. He had a difficult job there because Paul Walker died, which was a slightly awkward scenario to get through, but he helmed that film well. And it was a bit of a mess at the end because their lead character had died, so it was a difficult one. But I didn't really like The Conjuring, the first film. I didn't like the third one that just came out. I did like The Conjuring 2 a lot more. And he's produced so many pretty no-marky horrors, Annabelle and that series, and Jigsaw and The Nun. All these films are pretty rubbish. So I'm not a massive fan of his work. The other big one he did was Aquaman, which was a hugely enjoyable, amiable romp for the DC universe, which was floundering. So it did for me show that he was an expert at visual sequences and not at a screenplay, because I've rarely seen that much exposition in any film. The characters stand around explaining what's going on all the way through. And he's got the Aquaman Lost Kingdom with Amber Heard. That's going to prove very interesting indeed. But he released Malignant, and it's not been a big hit, but a lot of people are talking about it. It's fairly standard. It starts in 1993. Dr. Weaver and her colleagues treat a psychiatric patient who can project onto radios and do all that kind of stuff. He ends up becoming... Gabrielle ends up becoming violent and kills several staff members. The fact I'm reading the plot is because as soon as I started talking, I was like, what's that movie about? I can't even remember. 27. I'm reading this with actually interest. 27 years later, Madison Lake, a pregnant woman living in Seattle, returns home to her husband after... yes, that's right. And then we get into a domestic violence scenario where the husband's a brute. And this creature appears out of nowhere while she's sleeping. He smashed her head against the wall and she's been unconscious. But when she wakes, she's been brutally murdered and twisted up. And the police come and the killers all left some really weird sort of things like back to front fingerprints and was hanging from the ceiling and appears to be a supernatural entity. And this supernatural entity starts following Madison around. Who is Madison? Played by Annabelle Wallace as Madison Mitchell. No famous people in this film at all. The plot itself is very sort of in that it feels like watching something like The Ring. It's there's this malevolent force out there. People end up dying in strange situations. Madison gets visions of the deaths happening. And the police are, eventually convinced it must be her doing it, but she knows that there's this horrific entity out there killing people, usually bad people, it must be said. And now I can't remember the plot; it's so rote. Now the thing is, a lot of people are screaming about this film being great or being awful. Now, what I would say is this. When I would normally go for a horror that's got this much of a write-up, but the first 2/3 of it were awful. This is a film of two awful thirds and a absolutely magnificent final third. I did nearly turn it off. The first 2/3 are like a Michael Bay film. It's so superficial and rote. Everyone's dumb and it's painful to sit through. And it goes nowhere. Nothing in this film is scary. It is more gory than scary. There isn't one scary moment in this film. I saw Sinister again recently. Jesus, that was a mistake to watch at night. So it's not a scary film. It's more of a gory body horror film. Then, after 2/3 of a Michael Bay movie, James Wan decides to be Dario Argento for the final third of this film. And it's incredible. It goes absolutely nuts. It goes insane. So it's so bizarre because what's coming is like 10 out of 10 crazy. And what preceded that was so drab and so rote, such an ordinary, like Conjuring level horror film. It was actually very bland, very boring, very tepid. And other than like disfigurements and things like that, there was just nothing memorable about it. And then the final third, it is absolutely crazy. So it's a difficult one to recommend because for the majority of its runtime, it's awful. But that final third, if you do get there, and almost think as, you know, like the remake of Suspiria, where that final half hour just went absolutely crazy. Which is a film I actually liked all the way through, but the final third really went into Dario Argento madness land, the remake of Suspiria, I should say. So it is worth it for that, because once you get there, you're going to get into a land of crazy that most mainstream horror movies would never go near. It's that crazy. So I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10, with probably 5 of that going to the last third. Which is a truly baffling, magnificent third of a film. So Malignant, very much up and down, but 6.5 out of 10. And this is from one of the 2 feature albums, Sierra.